All right. Hello, Hub subscribers. We are back with another one of our awesome author interviews. We are joined today by the one and only 2025 Printz Honor winning Rex Ogle. Rex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Since this is a blog that focuses on a teen librarian audience, always want to start off talking to our authors about your personal history with libraries. What have libraries meant to you, not just as an author, but just throughout your life in general?
Oh, well, I've never been in a library. Just kidding. Honestly, it started pretty early. My abuela was from Mexico and, extreme poverty. So she did not have access to books or libraries growing up. And when she moved to the United States, the libraries were her favorite place in the world. Every time I went to visit her, she would take me to libraries. There was a lot of rough stuff going on at my house, and she always told me, if you're gonna run away to a library. I did that many times. Um, my local librarians were very sweet. They often shared their lunches with me. They never judged me when I came in with a black eye. And more than once, they had to come into the bathrooms when they were closing at 8 o'clock and be like, "You can't stay here," which I think was really hard for them because they knew that I was a kid who was running away to the library for very important reasons. But libraries meant everything. I mean, I was super poor, so buying new books was not an option for me. But I used to ride my bike around town to laundromats and phone booths, getting spare quarters to go to like local thrift stores to buy comic books, which is how I developed a love of X-Men. But yeah, I mean, libraries are everything to me.
So you mentioned comics. What else? What else formed young Rex that turned you into the author that you are today?
Ooh, you know, I had a huge love of story, and I think, looking back, I was born in Abilene, Texas, but my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved to Guam and Okinawa until I was 4.5, and then moved back to Texas. And during that time, I didn't, I don't think I socialized with a lot of kids. I was a very lonely kid. I had my parents who were always fighting. So again, moving back to the United States, I didn't have that many friends. I wasn't socialized, like I wasn't used to being around people. Um, Also, the first movie I ever saw, my uncle took me to see Night of the Living Dead when I was 5, which destroyed my little brain. So I was terrified of movies. I was terrified of televisions. I was terrified of puppets. So again, my abuela was like, "Well, how about books?" And so books were everything to me. And I will say this, like someone asked me recently, and they're like, "What made you want to be a writer?" And I think it was because, my parents were very consumed with each other, with themselves. I was something of an afterthought. So when they were getting a divorce, when I was like 5.5, 6, I had an assignment from a teacher, Miss Ham, 2 M's, first grade. Her husband was a magician. He came in on Fridays, if we behaved all week. And she told us to write a story. And I went home, and it was just supposed to be like a one-page story. I wrote like a 12-page story. I illustrated it. I was so proud of it. And when I showed it to my parents, the response was very lackluster. My dad said the art wasn't very good. My mom's like, "Well, if the assignment was one page, why did you write 12?" Like there was no excitement. But when I went to school that Monday and showed my teacher the amount of overwhelming positive joy and love that she showed me for it, I mean, I think I've been chasing that affirmation ever since. I think it was so formative for me to have someone praise me in that way and tell me what I did was worthwhile that, I mean, yeah, I've been writing ever since.
Well, and just, with us focusing on a librarian audience, we've got people from all different types of libraries that are seeing that celebratory or celebration worthy stuff from you. Um, of the authors we've talked to, you're the one that has just kind of the widest range of audiences. What's it like to write for kids from everything from our youngest elementary all the way up through our young adults? What's it like to write for such a broad spectrum of ages?
Well, first off, I'm super childish. And I say that with love. I've always gravitated towards, X-Men, science fiction, fantasy. I have a bunch of tattoos that people can't see that are children's book illustrations from my favorite books as a kid. Um, I have everything from, I'm like looking at my arms, everything from Maurice Sendak's Chicken Soup with Rice to Dr. Seuss to Hardy Boys. I mean, these were the books that I grew up on. And at every stage of my life, I've wanted to be a different kind of writer. Like first I wanted to write Dr. Seuss books, then I wanted to write Hardy Boys, then I wanted to write Stephen King, and then I wanted to write, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, the list goes on, but I was always very informed by what I was reading. And so for me, when I went into working in publishing, I remember like my first job was at DC Comics, and of course, I wasn't supposed to be writing anywhere else, and they were paying me $35,000 a year living in New York City, which is not very much money after taxes. Um, and so I was not only bartending, but I was also working on like little 8x8s and 6x9s under pen names. Uh, and I wasn't supposed to be writing because it's considered a conflict of interest, but I was also writing novels. I was also writing comic books for different audiences. Like the thing is I have so many ideas. I have a spreadsheet, no joke, on my laptop that grows every week. And it has over 300 books listed of ideas that I've wanted to write. Some of them since I was 10, like Dan and Green Gables was an idea I came up with when I read Anne and Green Gables in the fourth grade. And then some of them are brand new ideas. Like I was walking down Sunset walking the dog the other day and I saw a flyer for group therapy and I was like, oh, that's a book. And it's a kid's book. It's a book about a kid in therapy because I don't think that's a graphic novel that I've seen yet. And I really, after everything I've lived through, after everything I've been through, I think kids need to see themselves in more just than one kind of story. Like it's so easy to be like, oh, well, this kid only likes science fiction, or this kid only likes superheroes, or this kid won't read superhero. And I support any books that kids are reading, but my hope is that basically I'm a gateway drug. I'm going to get, reluctant readers to come in and read something like Four Eyes, and then it will lead them to something like Free Lunch, which, from a graphic novel to prose, from something very silly and fun to something that can be very emotionally devastating. Like I think that it's not that kids publishing wants to pigeonhole writers for sales and marketing purposes, which I completely understand. That is a business model. For me, as a creative, as an artist, like I want to create art for everyone, not just one kind of person. And I have so many ideas. So, yeah, I'm just hoping to be a big gateway drug for kids. And by drug, I mean a gateway to reading, which I hope doesn't sound arrogant. There's so many stories that I discovered through librarians, through libraries. Like I would come in and they knew my taste. They knew I liked action. I liked adventure, but they would also steer me towards more literary things because they knew I was capable of reading them and taking away something from it. So in that regard, yeah, I would like to populate my own library one day with all 400 book ideas.
Now, you mentioned the spreadsheet of ideas. When you enter something in there, does it are you saying I have a conception for this middle grade novel, or I have a conception for this young adult novel, or this graphic novel, or does it present itself that way as you continue developing the idea?
You know, it's crazy because when I was, young, I wanted to do picture books. When I was in middle school books, and then so on and so on. I wanted to be a poet when I was a kid until, I had the bullies kick the crap out of me and tear up my poetry book that I'd written, and I was like, I'll never write poetry again. And I didn't until my abuela was passing away from dementia. Then I wrote Abuela, Don't Forget Me. And I, I was like, oh yeah, I love writing in verse, but I also love comic books. Like I spent a career becoming a graphic novel editor, and I've always loved prose. So the first thing I do is when I come up with the concept, I'm like, what is the best way to tell this story? Or what is the format that is appropriate for the audience I'm trying to reach? Because I know that we're supposed to th think in terms of middle grade and young adult, but to me, it's, there's younger middle grade, there's upper middle grade, there's lower young adult. Like kids don't need those labels. Kids will figure out what they want to read. But I know for librarian purposes, for sales purposes, like we need to categorize things. But I think for kids, like we want them to grow as readers. We want them to experiment. We want them to read different things. And so, yeah, for me, when I come up with a story idea, it's very much, okay, what is the best vehicle for this story? Um, for example, with When We Ride, uh, you know, it's a book about two kids who are seniors in high school. One is trying really hard to make something of his life. The other is a drug dealer. Uh, a lot of people are like, "Why'd you write that in verse?" And I'm like, because the best friend of mine who it's based off of loved Tupac. He loved Tupac. He loved those music lyrics because I did not like rap and until he gave me the lyric sheets from Tupac CD and I read them and I wept like a baby and I was like, "Oh, he's a modern day Shakespeare. Now I get it." So when I wrote When We Ride, there was no question about it. It had to be in verse. And also because I don't think the audience that I want reading that book, I don't think teenage boys want to read a 300-page book in verse, but a book, I mean, in prose, but a book in verse, I think they'll consider it.
And I think from a librarian perspective, that's definitely one of those that, you have the kids that finish Long Way Down and they're like, I need something like this. And until When We Ride, I didn't really have too many answers for that. Um, since you brought it up, one of the things that really strikes a lot of readers about When We Ride is just how believable and how relatable those two boys are. How do you develop that in such an economy of words?
Um, well, A, I think I cheat because I told myself no more memoirs, and When We Write is like 70% true. Um, um, but here's the thing is like when you're telling a story in verse, it's kind of nice because it really, I love cooking. Cooking is like the one creative endeavor I do that is like for no one except for me. Um, and when I'm cooking, like when you're doing like a reduction of the sauce, like, or even when you're making spaghetti sauce, like you want to boil some of the water out, or you want to add water to something like ground beef with vegetables and salsa so that it cooks down so it seals in the flavor. But you're literally pulling out all the stuff you don't need. And I think that's what I do with verse is I'm like, okay, how much do I really need? Like even like I'll write, a few pages of verse and then I'll go back the next day and read it and I'll be like, there's a lot of thes in here. Like, let's drop some of the thes. Like, let's make this as concise, as short as possible. You know, uh, economize the word count, like down. Less words is more words because I think, like when kids listen to Taylor Swift, she has a very limited 2.5 minutes for a song. She cannot cram in all the words she wants. She has to reduce it down to the bare bones. And in that way, I think it delivers the message that much more powerfully. It's quantity or no, I mean it's quality over quantity.
So for our viewers that aren't familiar, When We Ride, your newest novel in verse, um, two high school best friends. One is like you said, based on yourself, the I need to succeed because this is my way out of poverty. And then his best friend, who is a drug dealer. What has been the response to When We Ride so far?
Um, Honestly, here's the thing. I don't think my books sell in bookstores, but they do sell in libraries, which I'm super appreciative of. Because honestly, that's the audience I want. I couldn't afford books growing up. I went to the library for books, and I know there are millions upon millions upon millions of people in this country today that cannot afford to buy a $25 book. And so they go to the library and they get it for free. That is an amazing service. So to me, the fact that my books sell in libraries, it's just perfect. It's just wonderful. I completely forgot the question. Sorry.
Uh, ha- in terms of response, have
Oh,
you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like what kind of
Yes.
feedback are you getting on this one now that it's
So
out there?
far, it's mostly librarians, which is why I just said what I said. And most of them said, "Why did you make me cry again?" which I take as a high compliment. Um, because I want stories to be as I want my stories to be as realistic as possible. I want them to live in the real world. I mean, obviously with superhero and sci-fi stuff, it's a little more fantastical, but these are the emotions that we live through, and these are the stuff kids are going through. So I went to Y'all West recently, which is a literary festival over here in California, where they literally truck in, bus in. They don't come in trucks, they come in buses. School buses full of kids from all over California from different schools. And it's a Saturday. These kids come in, they usually, have 20 bucks, 40 bucks to spare, and they get to see authors. And of course, there's a book fair so they can buy books. I read one page from When We Ride, which is basically just all the different names for weed. And I read it in one of the panels. And after that, like I went to my signing, and there was a line, no joke, of I think every boy from like two or three schools, because I had read it about drugs. They saw the cover, which had a gun on it, and they started telling their friends. And these boys, teenage boy after teenage boy after teenage boy, lined up to buy the book. Now, I'm sure it was more just like a visceral gut reaction of like kids being like, "Oh my God, he talked about drugs for a whole page. This whole book is about drugs. There's a gun on the cover." But my hope is that that reception to that book and books like that, like I mean, you mentioned Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down, which I think is a complete work of genius literature in today's society. So comparing me to him like makes my mind melt a little bit because I think he's amazing. Um, but yeah, I do hope the reception is good and that more boys pick up books and say, "Oh wow, there are books that I can relate to because this is what the real world is like."
One of the conversations that I had with a lot of people, you and I met at ALA National Conference, and one of the conversations I had there with a lot of people is that there seems to be a lack of believable and relatable male protagonists in YA. For the longest time, books for young people were about boys, and it was, the white boy with the dog, and now a lot of our, best developed, most relatable characters are girls, which, as you said, sometimes leaves out our boys. Do you intentionally look to fill that void, or is that just the response that you're getting from teenage readers?
Uh, okay, so this is a multi-layered answer for me for you. So growing up, obviously, I was a boy. So I wanted more books for boys, and there was not a lot out there. And what was out there was fantasy and science fiction and Hardy Boys. There were not like a lot of emotional, like, me and my dad are having a rough time. My dad's not talking, since the divorce, my dad and I don't talk. There weren't books like that for me growing up. And there was definitely a hole in my life for stories like that. And I came up with stories and I would write them myself. Not very well because I was a kid. Um, and then yeah, when I finished college, I was like, okay, now I'm gonna go get a master's of fine arts and creative writing because I still don't think I know what I'm doing. They all rejected me, the top 12 programs in the country. So I used all the money I was making at the Cheesecake Factory and I moved up to New York City with like $1,000 in a duffel bag, and I managed to kick in the door, and it was not easy, but I kicked in the door at Marvel Comics, then DC Comics, then Scholastic, then Little Brown. Um, and what I found was comic books. Now this was 25 years ago, so don't quote me on this being modern, but when I started working in comic books, it was a boys' club. It was all white men running comic books. And then when I went over to traditional books, it was all white women making books. And I do remember bringing books to acquisitions and people being like, "Well, these are books for boys." They're like, "No one's gonna buy this." And I was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "You do know 50% of the population is boy." And they're like, "Yeah, but boys don't read." And I'm like, "Because there aren't books for boys." And it was an argument I had many times. It was a very frustrating argument. I actually had books that were rejected at acquisitions because they were too heavily boy. Not so much at Scholastic. Oh, I don't. Okay, I was like, I'm gonna get in trouble with someone. But I will say, I mean, in publishing, this was the truth. I worked at a place where the women in I was the only male in a department of, this was not Scholastic, this was the other one. I was the only male in the entire acquisitions meeting. And so I had 30 females basically telling me boys don't read books, which was very disheartening. And I will say that the entire time I was in New York, 15 years, I wrote 18 novels and all of them had boy protagonists, which is sometimes I'm like, well, that's why they were all rejected because they were all rejected. Every single one of them, including Free Lunch, which was rejection number 14, and sat collecting dust on my laptop for 6 years before it found a home with Simon Bowden at Norton for Young Readers. Um, but yeah, so now, I mean, honestly, I'm so excited to be writing books for boys. Because boys deserve books too. I mean, when I was growing up, you were either a reader or you played sports. And then there were video games, and now there are social media, the internet. There are a ton of distractions. But at the end of the day, there are still boy readers out there, and that there are boys out there who are potential readers. They just haven't been given a book that they want yet. Um, and it's so important to provide those books for boys. And boys have a very wide spectrum of taste, which is, I certainly did, which is why I try to write everything that the younger version of me would have wanted to read.
Well, then along those lines, and you brought up free lunch, so that brings us to probably your most consistent male protagonist, which is Rex Ogle himself. You've told so much of your life story, especially your young life story, for your readers. What's it like revisiting those artistically to bring that to, young readers that might be going through similar situations?
Well, the funny thing is growing up, obviously I had a ton of shame. Uh, I would come to school in my secondhand clothes with like, you could see my socks in the holes in my shoes, my backpacks I had to hold upside down because there were holes in the bottom. I had black eyes, which people assumed were from fighting with kids, but were often from my parents. Um, we were poor. There was violence. I was dealing with being queer at a young age in rural Texas in the 80s. I had so much shame and so much fear and so many secrets, and I didn't want to talk about any of it. It's one of the reasons I've always gravitated towards superheroes and fantasy and science fiction. I don't want to watch NCIS. I do not want to watch, procedurals about cops. I do not want to know about the real world in TVs and books and films. This is not the stuff I like. I want to be taken somewhere else because life is hard and there's a lot of pain, and I want to go somewhere else. And so as a writer, that's kind of where I started. I was writing big fantasy, big supernatural, big sci-fi epics, all of it world building out the wazoo. One day I will give who Harry Potter a run for her money because I can build a world that big. Just wait.
I think Supernatural
But
Society is close.
thank you. Oh, I love that book. That was rejection number 13. Um, and so the thing is, I didn't want to write this stuff. I never wanted to write memoirs. I never wanted to write about my childhood. The first 13 books of the 18 books that I wrote that were rejected in New York, all of them were fantasy, high fantasy, with the exception of Free Lunch. And that I only wrote because after 13 rejections, I was like, what am I doing wrong? And an editor said, you know plot, you know character, you know world building really well. He's like, there's no emotion in these books. There's no emotional arc. There's no heart. And most importantly, there's none of you in this book. He's like, where are you in this book? And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, you have all these kid characters as your protagonists, but we don't know anything about their home lives. And I was like, it doesn't matter. Like they're a wizard or they have a jetpack and they're going to space. And the editor was like, no, you need to put some parts of yourself into these books. And that was writing Free Lunch was the hardest thing I'd ever done at that point. I had panic attacks every night after I wrote a chapter. I cried myself to sleep. I went into a very dark depression. Punching Bag was even worse. Road Home was worse than that because my abuela was passing away from dementia while I was writing that. these are not stories I wanted to tell. These are not stories I wanted to share with the world. But after 22 years of my books getting rejected, I knew I needed to try something new. Like I said, Free Lunch was rejected, but then Simon and Norton picked it up. It got published. The librarians loved it, which still makes my brain melt a little bit, in the best possible way. But Simon showed me, like through school visits and conversations with librarians, that there were a need for these books that showed kids like it's okay to be living through this stuff. This is not your fault. You are not alone. You can survive this. You can have a really, really rough start at life, and you can still put in the work and you can find joy, you can find happiness, you can build your own home, you can find your own friends, you can build your own family. These are things that took me a long time to find myself. And I think it's so important for us to tell kids early on because I don't know that adults in their lives are telling them this. I don't know that the adults in their lives are capable of telling them this. My parents certainly were not capable of saying these kinds of things to me. Um, when I wrote these, I did not want to demonize my parents. I think they did the best they could, and I always try to bring this up when I do school visits because, readers will say, "I hate your mom," and I'm like, don't hate my mom. She did the best she could with the tools that she had. You know, sh you can say she failed me, but I would say society failed her first. Because at the time, bipolar was not something talked about. Domestic violence was something that was kind of kept behind closed doors. These were things that were not openly discussed. So I think kids growing up now, it is more discussed. It is more out in the open, but it is also more prevalent. And I do think these kids need to know that what they're going through is not their fault, that they're not alone, and that they should stay optimistic. They should keep hope in their hearts. And if I can do that through books, if I can recommend a book, not even my own, but like Jason Reynolds' books are so inspirational, and Jacqueline Woodson, um, Laura Halls Anderson, A.S. King. I mean, there's so many writers out there writing these amazing books for kids that yes, there's no wizards, there's no jetpacks, but they're so important that they exist in the world.
And with all of those hard topics, the abuse, the mental illness, addiction, and like you said, exploring growing up queer, uh, what kinds of, community challenges and community pushbacks have you received from that?
Um, I will say, like the very first book I wrote under Ray Terciero, my pen name was Little Women, Meg Jo Beth and Amy. I mean, in my head, it doesn't get more PG than that. I love Little Women growing up. I've seen all the movies. I've read the book many times. So when I wrote this modern day love letter to both Louisa May Alcott and New York City, um, I put so much love into that book, and almost immediately, one of my friends from high school forwarded me. I don't know what they're called, like an online petition, and it had 40,000 signatures to have the book removed from bookshelves in local libraries and towns in the South. And that tickled me pink. I was like, that's awesome. Because I was like, when you ruffle feathers, that means you've created something worthwhile. If you can open a conversation, all the better. And it was only ended up being banned in Louisiana and Texas, and only in a few counties. And the librarians in both of those places stepped up and got the books back on shelves. I don't think they were able to get them on middle grade bookshelves, but they ended up being on young adult bookshelves, which I will totally take. Um, and because these stories, like at the end of the day, I'm like, there's nothing upsetting in Meg Jo Beth and Amy except for one character comes out because she realized that she's gay. And I don't think that's a negative thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't know. I feel like having read so much sci-fi, I look at the time we are at now in our society, and I'm like, it's such a blip on the radar. Like in 1,000 years, like there's going to be 18 genders, and there's going to be aliens, and there's going to be dog people, and we're all going to be friends, and we're all gonna, we'll have real problems like pollution and politics, and gender identity won't even be a thing. So to me, it's like we're just stuck in this place where people are so, I think the word is myopic, nearsighted. I don't know, it breaks my heart because I think kids are so open-minded and they're, you know, I hate the phrase I don't see color because adults should never say that. But when I was a kid, I wasn't racist when I was born. I wasn't homophobic when I was born. These were things that I was taught. When I moved to my dad kicked me out for being gay when I was 17. I was homeless. When I moved to New York City 4 years later after college, I was like, yeah, like I'm the most open-minded, zen, compassionate person in the world. And someone's like, do you want to watch a show called RuPaul's Drag Race? And I was like, drag queens, they're disgusting. That makes me so uncomfortable. And they're like, you're homophobic. And I was like, how can I be homophobic if I'm gay? And they're like, think about it. And it took me a long time to realize like my uh dislike of drag queens in my early 20s had nothing to do with drag queens. It had to do with my own internal homophobia that I was taught growing up. I was not racist as a kid. I was not homophobic. I was not sexist. These are all things that were taught to me. That's why I think my parents did the best they could. They had a bad education. They passed on the bad education to me. And now I have retaught myself. I have re-educated myself to be open-minded, to be compassionate, to be loving, to treat not only myself, but others with kindness because we're all people. And that's one of the things I really want to focus on in my books. And if they are banned because of that, so be it. It doesn't hurt my feelings. It honestly, like I've been sent to banned book events and it annoys me because I am sent to banned books to talk to people who are against banned books about being against banned books. And I'm like, this is a waste of my time. We're all on the same page. Send me to Louisiana to the county that banned my book. Those are the people I want to sit down and have a conversation with. I don't want to argue with them. I would love to buy them a beer, order some wings, even though I don't eat wings. I like chicken nuggets. And have a conversation. Like, why do they think it's okay for them to live their life with hate? That's just not something that resonates with me. It's not something that's ever resonated with me. Even as a kid, I just never understood why we didn't like people because they were black or because they were gay or because they had a different faith than ours. It just boggles my mind. And yeah, I think that's a rambly way of answering that question, but um, I do hope that I convey some of these ideas of mine into these books for kids because we're all miseducated, and I think that we can all be better educated with compassion and kindness, not just to ourselves, but to others.
And so what do you say to those librarians that might be in communities that are, challenging the, queer content or the racial content in your books?
Oh, first off, I just want to hug them.
Rex Ogle
Anyone
is
who
a
knows
very
me,
good hugger for anybody who's watching, like the best hugs in
you,
young adult literature.
you know what it is. I mean, and again, like my best friend says I'm a trauma dumper, and I was like, it's my job. Um, I give good hugs because I feel like you have to mean it. And I did not get a lot of hugs growing up. Oh my gosh, sorry, I'm not gonna cry. I did not get a lot of hugs growing up. So for me, when I'm hugging someone, I hug them because I hug them the way I wanted to be hugged as a kid. And honestly, when they hug me back, it feels pretty amazing. And when it's librarians and teachers hugging me back, it's it's Miss Ham in first grade hugging me. And it just it hugs the kid inside me that did not get them. So that's why I love giving hugs. So that is why the first thing I would do is give these librarians hugs. And then I would say also self-care because I know that librarians are underpaid, underrespected. They are, not only giving books to the right books to the people who need them most, but they're also serving as community leaders. They're taking care of the homeless people who are coming in for air conditioning or to use the bathroom or water. Uh, librarians are, I don't know, the way I've been thinking about it more and more, I was like, they're modern day shamans. Like they are giving magic spells to kids. And by magic spells, I mean stories that will teach them how to survive. Stories have been around since the dawn of time when cavemen were sitting around in caves talking to one another, being like, yo, I survived a saber-toothed tiger attack today by doing this, or I found a potato and I learned that if you boil it for an hour, it's real soft to eat. Like storytelling is survival. And in a way, librarians are the people who are teaching kids how to survive. They are teaching the next generation to be open-minded and to look in books that are both mirrors and windows, which is not my quote. We all know that it's Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. I always mess that up. I think that's her name. Um, but I mean, it's so important what librarians do. So, yeah, again, hugs and take care of yourself and make sure you self-care because I know you're fighting the good fight and you need to be strong. And in order to do that, you have to take care of yourself. So make sure to take an hour, at least 1 hour a week to just, I don't know, pamper yourself, even if that just means eating a Duncan Hines cake, which sometimes I will make a cake at home and eat the whole thing. Not in one sitting, but over like 2 or 3 days.
Well, I cannot tell you enough how much I appreciate this. I'm starting to get the Zoom notification that we have less than 3 minutes left. I was joking with a colleague that we would probably get through about 10% of what I wanted to talk about with just how much you have to share, and I think we maybe got close to that. Um,
Okay. Have
where
me
where
back as my pen name. That's why I have other author names.
that actually is probably because I was going to ask about what the difference is between Rex Ogle and Ray, but might not have time for that in the next 2.5 minutes. What's
Yeah.
next for you, and where can we find you?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram at Third Rex. It's mostly just pictures of me and my dog and books. But I recommend my newsletter, which I have 25 years of therapy under my belt, and that means everything from self-help books to antidepressants to transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is like baby electroshock therapy. Like I've tried it all to get out of depression and anxiety and et cetera, et cetera. And so I try to just share little tips for how to find joy. And yeah, you can find that on my website, rexogle.com. But yeah, what's next? I have so many books. I'm not bragging, but I do have 24 books under contract right now, and I'm writing as fast as I can
It
because
was
I'm
only
just so
13
happy.
the last time I talked to you, so congratulations.
Uh, this year has been amazing. This year has been amazing. Don't tell my publishers because they don't know that I'm doing this.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much. And for those of you watching, school librarians, public librarians, please go to rexogle.com, bring him to your libraries. If you can't tell, just a magnetic speaker, just amazing to watch. Rex, thank you so much for joining us on the Hub today.
My pleasure. Ask Ray Terciero back.
I will definitely reach out to his people.
Take care.